First, I'll begin with the introduction of my study. Grammar, as we know in simple terms, refers to the system of rules that help us form meaningful sentences in a language. However, in the context of ESL learning, grammar is often considered one of the most difficult components. Why? This is because English grammar contains complex rules, many exceptions, and somehow inconsistent structures, which make it challenging for learners to fully understand and apply it in real-life situations. Because of these challenges, teachers and educators need more effective teaching approaches. One of the approaches highlighted in my study is by using visual representation. Visual representation means using images, diagrams, or visual elements to present information in a clearer and more understandable way. Studies have shown that visual representation can improve learners' understanding, increase engagement in class, and also enhance motivation during learning. So, this study focuses on how visual representation can support grammar teaching, especially from the perspective of Tslb pre-service teachers themselves. Next, we will be moving on to problem statement. The problem statement in my study highlighted the main issue, which is that many ESL learners still struggling to master grammar. This is mainly because grammar concepts are often abstract, meaning they are difficult to visualize and understand clearly in one go. As a result, learners often cannot apply grammar correctly even after learning it. Another problem is the teaching approach itself that was used by the teachers. Traditional grammar teaching methods often focus on memorization and repetitive drills. These methods do not promote meaningful understanding and may cause learners to lose more motivation in the learning process themselves. Because of this, there is a need for more effective teaching strategies, such as visual representation, which can make abstract concepts more concrete and easier to understand. Now, we'll move on to the next slide, which will talk about research objective and questions. Firstly, research objective refers to the specific goals that this study aims to achieve. There are three main objectives in this study. First, to identify digital literacy in using visual representation level of Tslb pre-service teacher to teach grammar to primary ESL learners. Second, to examine the degree of utilizing visual representation in teaching grammar among Tslb pre-service teachers. And last one, to determine the relationship between digital literacy in using visual representation and degree of utilizing visual representation in teaching grammar to ESL primary learners. Based on this objective, three research questions are developed, which directly guide my study. These questions are: what is the level of digital literacy in using visual representation among Tslb pre-service teachers for teaching grammar to primary ESL learners? The second one is: what is the degree of utilizing visual representation in teaching grammar among Tslb pre-service teachers? And last one, is there a relationship between Tslb pre-service teachers' digital literacy in using visual representation and their degree of utilizing visual representation in teaching grammar to primary ESL learners themselves? Next, I will explain the research hypothesis for this study. A research hypothesis refers to a prediction about the relationship between variables that can be tested through data analysis. In this study, there are two types of hypotheses, which are the null hypothesis and the alternative hypothesis. First, the null hypothesis, or HO, state that there is no significant relationship between TESOL pre-service teachers' digital literacy level and their use of visual representation in teaching grammar to ESL learners. This means that digital literacy does not influence how often teachers use visual representation. On the other hand, the alternative hypothesis, or H1, states that there is a significant relationship between TESOL pre-service teachers' digital literacy level and their use of visual representation. This means that teachers with higher digital literacy are more likely to use visual representation in their teaching. So, in this study, the hypothesis will be tested using statistical analysis to determine whether the relationship exists or not. Next, we'll answer slide of significance of the study. For this part of the presentation, I'll tell you the significance of the study, which refers to the importance of contribution of the research. This study contributes to the field of ESL teaching, particularly in grammar instruction. Unlike previous studies that mainly focus on effectiveness through tests, this study focuses on the teacher's perceptions, their readiness and digital literacy, and how they actually use visual representation in real classroom context, or we call as practices. Therefore, this study helps to fill the gap in understanding how prepared teachers are and how they apply visual strategies in their teaching experiences. So now we'll move on to chapter 2, which is the literature review. Now, I will talk about my literature review. A literature review refers to the process of examining previous studies related to the research topic in order to understand what has always been discovered and to identify gaps in the research itself. From past researches that I have found, there is a lot about visual aids play a significant role in improving learners' understanding and retention of information in their learning process. This is because visuals help learners process information more effectively by presenting it in a clearer and more concrete form. In addition, visual representation increases learners' engagement and motivation, as it makes lessons more interesting and interactive, especially for younger learners. In the context of ESL learning, visual representation is particularly useful because grammar concepts are often abstract. By using visuals such as diagrams or images, learners are able to connect this abstract concept to real-life context and situation, which makes learning more meaningful and easier to understand, and the memory's retention is also longer. However, the literature also highlights that the effectiveness of visual representation does not depend only on the tool itself, but also on the teacher. Teachers who are confident and skilled in using visual tools are more likely to create effective and engaging learning experiences. Furthermore, digital literacy is an important factor in this. Teachers need to have the ability to use different digital tools effectively in order to create and apply visual materials in their teaching. Therefore, based on the literature, it is clear that both teachers' skills and their perceptions plays a crucial role in determining how visual representation is used in their classroom lesson process. This leads to the focus of my study. Now we'll move on to the next slide, which is research theory. Research theory refers to the theoretical foundation that I have chosen to support and explain the concept in a study. This study is based on 3 main theories, and each theory helps to explain different aspects of the research. The first one that I chose is dual coding theory proposed by Pivio. This theory explains that learners process information through 2 systems: the verbal systems, which deals with words, and the visual systems, which deals with images and diagrams. When both systems are used together, learning becomes more effective because learners are able to form stronger mental connections between the concepts. In this study, this theory supports the use of visual representation in grammar teaching, as combining verbal explanation with visuals can help learners better understand abstract grammar concepts. The second theory that I have chosen is the cognitive theory of multimedia learning by Meyer. This theory suggests that learners understand information better when it is presented using both words and visuals rather than words alone. It also emphasizes that learners have limited cognitive capacity, so information should be presented in a way that does not overload them. In relation to this study, visual representation have organized grammar concepts in a clearer way and more structured, which reduces confusion and improves comprehension instead to the learners. The third theory is the technology acceptance model proposed by Davis. This theory explains that individuals that likely to use technology if they perceive it as useful and easy to use. In this study, this theory helped explain Tslb3353 teachers' behavior. How? If the teachers believe that visual tools are useful and easy to apply, and if they have sufficient digital literacy, they are more likely to use visual representation in their teaching process. Overall, these 3 theories work together to support the study. How come? Dual coding theory explains how learners learn the lesson. Multimedia learning theory explains how information of the lesson should be presented by the teachers. And last one, technology acceptance model explains why teachers should use or choose not to use visual tools in their learning. These theories provide a strong foundation for understanding both the teaching process and teacher behavior in this study. Next, we will move on to the conceptual framework of my study. A conceptual framework explains the variable in a study and the relationship between them. In my study, there are 2 types of variables, which we can identify as the independent variables and dependent variables. The teacher's perceptions and digital literacy, these are considered independent variables because they may influence teachers' teaching practices in their classroom. The dependent variable includes the degree of using visual representation in teaching grammar. This refers to how often teachers use visual representation such as picture, images, diagrams, videos in teaching grammar. This framework shows that teachers' perception and their level of digital literacy can affect how frequently they are confident enough to use their visual representation in their classroom. This is also supported by the theories discussed earlier. For example, the technology acceptance model explains how perceptions influence usage of the visual representation, and dual coding and multimedia learning theories explain why using visual is effective in teaching. So, by the end of it, the conceptual framework connects both of the variables and theories, showing a clear relationship between what teachers think and what they are capable of doing and what they actually practice in their teaching process in the classroom themselves. That's why we are interviewing and questioning pre-service teacher instead because they have already went for their first phase of practicum. Now we'll move on to the chapter 3, which is research methodology. Research methodology refers to the overall process used to conduct this study. This study uses a cross-sectional survey design. This means data is collected only once from the respondents, making it time efficient and suitable for the study. For the research instrument, a questionnaire is used, specifically an online questionnaire. A questionnaire is a tool used to collect and organize data systematically. It consists of 3 sections: demographic information of the respondent, digital literacy of pre-service teacher, and degree of usage of visual representation in teaching grammar. The responses are measured using a 6-point Likert scale. Next, we'll move on to the next one, which is pilot study. A pilot study is a preliminary trial conducted before the actual research to test the research process. In this study, the pilot study involved 30 Tslb pre-service teachers from Tun Hussein On Institute of Teacher Education. The purpose of this pilot study is to identify any unclear questions, detect difficulties faced by respondents, and to improve the overall quality of the questionnaire itself. Before distributing the questionnaire, experts will review it to ensure its validity. Then, the same questionnaire will be distributed through Google Form, and the collected data will be used to refine and improve the instruments. Next is the data collection method. Data collection refers to the process of gathering information from respondents. In this study, a total of 144 respondents are involved. The participants are Tslb pre-service teachers who have completed at least one teaching practicum phase. The data collection process begins with creating a questionnaire using Google Forms. Then, the link will be distributed through Telegram groups, targeting these Tslb students across 4 ITE campuses. The respondents complete the survey voluntarily online, and since this is a cross-sectional study, the data is collected within a short period of time. Lastly, I will explain the data analysis method. The data analysis refers to the process of organizing and interpreting data to answer research questions. There are 2 types of analysis used in this study. First is descriptive statistics. Descriptive statistics means summarizing the data. It includes mean score, which shows the overall level of responses received. Standard deviation, which shows how consistent the responses are. Frequency distribution, which shows how many respondents selected each option that is available. Second is inferential statistic. Inferential statistic is used to examine relationship between variables. This study uses Pearson correlation analysis. This analysis determines whether there is a relationship between digital literacy and the use of visual representation, and also show the strength and direction of the relationship. For all data analysis, SPSS software is used. SPSS helps to calculate mean scores, standard deviation, and frequency distribution. Also, perform correlation analysis efficiently. Okay, now to end my presentation, in conclusion, this study aims to explore Tslb pre-service teachers' digital literacy in using visual representation in teaching grammar to ESL learners and their degree of using the visual representation in teaching grammar itself to teach grammar. I hope this presentation will be able to help my audience a little bit in understanding the process of starting a research writing and what goes into the early stages of it. Thank you for listening. Now, let's move on to the Q&A session of the presentation.
Hi, my name is Sharifah. I am 32 years old this year. Currently, I'm working in Petronas Carigali. May I ask you a question? Why do you choose this topic?
Okay, to answer your question, I chose this specific topic because grammar is one of the most challenging components in ESL learning. We've been known, many learners struggle to understand and apply grammar rules effectively in their daily life context. At the same time, visual representation is increasingly used in teaching, but not many studies focus on teachers' perception and readiness, especially among TESOL pre-service teachers. So, what I would like from this research is I wanted to explore how prepared future teachers are in using visual representation and how often they actually use it in teaching grammar.
Hi, Assalamualaikum. My name is Sharifah Namira. I am 22 years old and I am currently studying at UiTM Shah Alam. I actually have two questions for you today. First and foremost, I wanted to ask, why did you decide to focus on TESOL pre-service teachers instead of in-service teachers? And my second question is, why did you decide to use the Pearson correlation analysis? That is all from me. Bye-bye.
Okay, thank you so much. Why I chose to focus on TESOL pre-service teachers because we are the future educators and our readiness will directly influence how teaching is carried out in classroom practices later on. From my own practical experience, I realized that even though we have learned different teaching methods and philosophies, not all of us are fully confident in applying them, especially when it involves using digital tools or visual materials because every people have different needs. So, by studying pre-service teachers now, I can understand our current level of digital literacy and how prepared we are to use visual representation before we enter the actual teaching profession. Compared to in-service teachers, they already have a lot of experiences and established teaching styles. But for pre-service teacher, this is the stage where we are still developing our skills, belief, and teaching approaches that we would like to carry on throughout our teaching process, teaching journey. This makes it important to study us at this stage because any gaps identified can still be improved through training. The findings of this study can also help teacher education programs to adjust or improve their training, especially in terms of integrating digital literacy and practical use of visual tools in teaching grammar, specifically. So overall, focusing on pre-service teachers allow the study to contribute to early prepared and long-term improvement in teaching practices. Okay, so for this one, I chose to use Pearson correlation analysis because my study is not just looking at individual variables, but I also want to see whether there is a relationship between them. Specifically, I am looking at the relationship between TESOL pre-service teachers' digital literacy and how often they use visual representation in teaching grammar, where I worded as degree of utilizing in my writing. From my understanding, Pearson correlation is suitable because it helps to identify whether a relationship exists and also how strong that relationship is, whether it is weak, moderate, or actually very strong. It also shows the direction of the relationship, meaning whether both variables increase together or move in opposite direction. This is important for my study because it directly answers my third research objective, which is to determine whether digital literacy influences the use of visual representation among TESOL pre-service teachers.
Assalamualaikum and good morning. My name is Nur Aida Nasuha binti Muhammad Nazaruddin. I am 21 years old and currently studying in program Ijazah Sarjana Muda Perguruan PISMP, majoring in Pendidikan Islam at Institut Pendidikan Guru Kampus Tun Hussein On. Currently, I am in semester 3. I would like to ask, Why did you choose a quantitative method survey for your research?
Thank you so much, Aida. I chose a quantitative method because it allows me to collect data from a large number of respondents efficiently and analyze it in a structured, objective way. As a pre-service teacher, this benefits me because it helps me understand general patterns in teaching practices, especially regarding digital literacy and the use of visual representation. For example, instead of relying on personal opinions of peers or colleagues, I can see actual trends among TESOL teachers, which can guide my own teaching practice in the future. As a new researcher, using a survey also helps me develop important research skills, such as designing questionnaires, analyzing data using statistical tools like SPSS, and interpreting numerical findings. So overall, this method not only supports my research objective, but also helps me build both my teaching and research competencies.
My name is Siti Nuransha and I am 19 years old. I study at Intake Education College at Section 17, Shah Alam. I would like to ask, what are the limitations of your
Thank you,
study?
sir. I would like to answer this question by saying one limitation that the participants are TESOL pre-service teacher who may not have extensive teaching experience yet. Because of this, their responses may be based more on a theoretical knowledge rather than actual classroom practice. For example, they may say they frequently use visual representation or believe it is effective, but they might not have enough real teaching experience to fully apply or evaluate it in different classroom situations. If the respondents were experienced in service teacher, their responses would likely to be more practical and based on real classroom challenges, such as constraint of time, students' differences, or classroom management issue. Therefore, experienced teachers might provide more accurate insights into how visual representation is actually used and the effectiveness in real teaching context.
Assalamualaikum and hi, my name is Alia and I am 20 years old. So may I know why do you use Likert scale in your questionnaire?
So this question, I use a Likert scale because it allows respondents to express their level of agreement or frequency in a structured and measurable way. In this study, I use a 6-point Likert scale. The agreement scale ranges from 1. Strongly disagree. 2. Disagree. 3. Slightly disagree. 4. Slightly agree. 5. Agree. 6. Strongly agree. These scales help to capture both respondents' opinions and how often they perform certain actions. In real life context, Likert scales are very commonly used, as we can see in example like course evaluations in universities, customer satisfaction surveys, feedback form after event or workshop in schools. And this shows that Likert skills are practical, widely accepted, and effective in collecting structured data for analysis.
Hi, my name is Nurse Samiha. I am 22 years old and I'm studying at UiTM Shah Alam. So I have a question. How can your findings be applied in real classroom practice?
Hi Samiha, to answer your question. So based on my practicum experience, I realized that when I use visual like diagrams or simple pictures, pupils understood the grammar much faster compared to just explaining the rules. So, the findings of this study can help the other teachers to see how important visual representation is in making grammar more understandable topic and engaging in class. If the result shows that digital literacy affects how teachers use visuals, then teacher training can focus more on helping future teachers to develop these skills. In real classroom practice, teachers can use things like charts, diagrams, or even digital tools like slides that we used to use Canva and YouTube videos to explain the topic of grammar in a clear way. This is not only to help people understand the topic better, but also to keep them more interested and motivated them during the lesson. As example, when I teach comparative adjective where we add R, ER, or we use more than adding it to the adjective, it means like we are comparing between two things, two subjects. When I use animals like giraffe and horse, like tall and shorter, sure, it's a good example and it's in the textbook. But the problem is some pupils never met a giraffe, nor they have met a horse in their life. So what I do is I took a real life picture of their classmates, like their peers, that they know how tall each one of them is. And I took the tallest kid in the class and the shortest kid in class, and I pasted their picture in a slide. With that, they already saw their friends face to face, and when they see it in a digital visual representation, that's where it connects to them. Like, oh, so we can use this topic, what we learn, to our own friends, and that's how I like to implement it, so that they will get a meaningful learning experience instead. Thank you.
Yeah, hi, Assalamualaikum. My name is Nur Hidayah. I'm 22 years old. I'm currently studying at UiTM Shah Alam. So I have a question. How does your study contribute to the field of education? Thank you.
Hi Hidayah, thank you for your question. So to answer that question, from my experience during practical myself, I noticed that many people struggle with grammar, especially when the lesson is too textbook based or focus on the rules only, as we usually does because we follow the SKP. So through this study, I want to contribute by showing how visual representation can actually support the teaching process, but more importantly, how teachers themselves can perceive and use it to their own advantage. Most studies focus on whether a method works or not, but in real classroom situation, what matters is whether teachers are ready and confident to use it by themselves. As a pre-service teacher, I feel like this is important because by the end of the day, we are the ones who will implement these strategies in the future. So, the findings can help teacher training programs to improve, especially in preparing us with digital skills and practical ways to use visual effectively in teaching grammar, specifically.